Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion on the key to better learning focused on indoor air quality. My name is Isaac Mulvihill, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Delos, a company focused on improving indoor environmental quality across multiple spaces, such as classrooms, offices, and homes. We have particularly worked closely with school districts of all sizes across the country to help improve indoor air quality during the pandemic and beyond. All right, before we get started, some quick administrative items to get out of the way. Please check the audio settings on your computer, as well as your speaker volume settings if you are having any audio trouble. If you are still having issues, please see our detailed audio troubleshooting file available under the resource list under the Q&A window. If the console freezes or if you hear music after the presentation has begun, please refresh your browser. If you have any questions during the discussion, please type them in the Q&A box accessible through the tabs located on your console and not in the group chat. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and a free-to-download version of the PowerPoint slides will be accessible through edweek.org, E-D-W-E-E-K, edweek.org, or using the same login as you used today. All right, and now on to today's conversation, a very important one. Indoor air quality, or IAQ, plays an integral role in the learning process for children. Improved IAQ not only helps reduce the spread of COVID and other respiratory illnesses, which we know has been a key focus in schools over the past couple of years, but it also promotes a healthier learning environment. Between standalone air purification units, HVAC upgrades, selecting the solutions that we need to deliver cleaner, healthier air in schools can be a difficult field to navigate. In today's discussion, we will not only explore why improving IAQ matters, but also how to select the right equipment for your schools. And now to our panelists. Peter Scialla is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Delos. Delos leverages a decade of scientific research conducted by Delos Labs and the Well Living Lab, which was founded as a Delos collaboration with the Mayo Clinic and applies an evidence-based approach to innovations for healthier indoor spaces. Dr. Zachary Pope is a physiologist in the Well Living Lab with additional expertise in behavioral science. He earned a doctorate in kinesiology with a minor in public health in 2018 at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Pope recently led a peer-reviewed study on the impact of portable air purification units in classrooms and has published multiple studies on the impact of indoor environments on health outcomes. We're also joined by Judy Miller. She is the Director of Risk Management and Environmental Safety for Perris Union High School District in California. Judy is a leader in the field of K-12 risk management, emergency preparedness, and response. She has a Master of Science degree in Occupational Health and Safety with a concentration in Environmental Management from Columbia Southern University. She holds the Associate Risk Management designation for public entities, as well as the Certified School Risk Management designation from the National Alliance for Education and Research. Alrighty, let's dive right into it. Question one, Pete, we're going to kick it off with you.
Okay.
Through your work, you're familiar with a range of business sectors from senior living to commercial real estate to residential environments. One of your main focuses, though, is on schools. What's different about indoor air quality for schools in particular?
Thanks, Isaac. And it's great to see all of you. So thank for everybody for joining today. You're right, Isaac. We've focused on so many different verticals of real estate. And if you think about our homes, our schools, our offices, you know, on average, we spend over 90% of our time in indoor environments. So the things like air quality and other factors that influence health and well-being are critical in those environments. What makes a learning environment unique is that children and adolescents spend a large portion of that time inside school buildings during a period where they're especially vulnerable to environmental influences on their development. All right, and that's a unique factor. This is a critical time. This is a critical age and our focus on the factors that are influencing health and well-being, especially during a time when these children are developing, is far too important to ignore. So, look, unfortunately, indoor air quality in schools is far from optimal in most cases. We know from our work and from decades of research in academia and other laboratory environments that poor air quality can cause a number of problems: missed school days, decreased performance, a reduction in sleep quality, and then of course, affecting staff and teachers as they may miss time due to illnesses. COVID-19 was an ignition switch for awareness. There's no doubt about that. At Delos, we had been focusing on fine particle filtration and air quality for the better part of the last decade. So well before COVID started, and our research here, is an approach that empowers schools with the information to make right decisions. And that's what we're all about, educating the industry first, providing data and proof points, especially in a marketplace where there's so many claims that need to be validated, but centering those claims on facts and separating fact from fiction. That's what we're here to do. Thank you, Isaac.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. And so it's really, it's tailoring that solution for those particular spaces, especially when we're talking about how highly occupied those environments in a classroom can be.
Yeah, you're talking about 20 plus or minus children sitting, a couple feet apart, and lots of dialogue. And so the idea here is to make sure that we're focusing on where people are convening and tackling the highest risk areas, air quality being the most prominent right now.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Excellent. Question 2 is for Zach. Indoor air quality can have an incredible impact on student health and well-being. Pete just alluded to this. As a leading researcher focusing on the intersection of indoor air quality and health, can you tell us a little bit more about the study you led on the effect of air filtration in the classroom?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Isaac, and great to be with everybody here today. Actually, this was a collaboration between our Well Living Lab team and some researchers at the University of Minnesota. And ultimately what we did is we actually simulated a classroom environment, and we looked at how standalone portable air purification units, how they can really act as a supplement to the HVAC system. So essentially the ventilation system that's present in really any commercial building, even your own homes, of course. And what we were most concerned about looking at is how the use of those portable air purification units as a supplement to the HVAC system, how they impacted how particles essentially floated in the air, but also, and quite unique to our study, how they ultimately ended up landing on the different surfaces throughout the room. And so really what we wanted to do with this was tackle 2 different routes of, in this case, proxy pathogen transmission, and look at it as holistically as possible to give us the best idea of how the use of these types of units ultimately impacts the particle travel, if you will. And if I had to break things down, I'd say there was 3 real main points that came out of this study. So use of those portable air purification units as a supplement to the ventilation system or the HVAC system, it actually increased the number of air changes per hour in that classroom from 3 to 6. So essentially, to give you an idea, 6 times per hour, or approximately every 10 minutes, clean recirculated air was now present in the room, which is great because the less stagnant air that you have, the better. Ultimately, you want the best mixing of air, and in, I guess, unison with the point that Peter brought up, where individuals are most congregated. And that really is the beauty of a portable solution, is it allows you to put it around where a lot of dialogue is going on, either between students, between the teacher and the students, so on and so forth. So that was the first thing that we saw. The second thing that we saw, and really important when you start thinking about ultimately what happens in a classroom, you can tend to get hot spots. So if you're in an older building in particular that has an older HVAC system, you can get kind of these areas of stagnant air where the air really doesn't exchange the way that it needs to. And that can be a problem, especially again, when you think about pathogen transmission. We don't really want that. And so ultimately what we saw when using the portable air purification units as a supplement to the HVAC system, we were actually able to lower the number of particles in the air by up to 5 times in most locations within the classroom. And that's really, again, very important when you start thinking about those hot spots, those areas of stagnant air. And that we were elated to see that. Largely unique to our study, and the final point here is that when we started looking at how particles, that were still hanging in the air, how they ultimately fell and deposited to surfaces, we actually saw about a third reduction in that deposition as well. You might be wondering, okay, why is that? Well, it's because you're ultimately using, in a very tailored manner, those portable air purification units, placing them where you need to throughout the room. And ultimately, because of how those units work, they're cleaning and recirculating clean air into the room. So they're pulling in those proxy infectious particles that we used and not allowing them to go back out. And so ultimately, if there's less particles that are floating around in the air, there's simply just less to deposit onto different surfaces. And thus, when you think about illnesses and pathogen transmission, that simply means that you're going to have less transmission risk from breathing in those infectious particles. And even though it's lesser of a concern, less risk of transmission from coming in contact with a contaminated surface and then touching your nose or touching your mouth, which we all know that, I still do it, and I know youth do too, that is a major concern in schools. So a little bit of a verbose answer to your question, Isaac, but that's ultimately what we found in the study you're referencing.
No, that's great. And it's so important, obviously, when we're talking about, we alluded to it in the introduction, COVID-19. We know that's respiratory borne primarily and respiratory transmitted aerosolized particles, but also, as you alluded to, with surface deposition being reduced, that's more the influenza type transmission route, right? So certainly a very important concept in that regard.
Correct. And it's very virus dependent as to what route of transmission will ultimately be most influential in causing illness. And that's why ultimately we wanted to take the most holistic approach. So spot on, Isaac.
Absolutely. And I may have introduced this just slightly as well in your bio, but that was peer reviewed, that was published in a journal and then featured in media outlets as well, that work that you performed. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So that's been published in one of the biggest journals in our field, actually, and it was actually nationally televised, the recap of the work that we did. So yes. Wonderful.
A verbose but very important answer to that question. Thank you, Zach. Judy, the next one is for you. As the Director of Risk Management and Environmental Safety for the Perris Union High School District, you're charged with providing a safe environment for students and staff, environmental concerns and emergency preparedness, among many other things. From your experience, what are the challenges facing schools today as it relates to indoor air quality?
Well, thank you. I think, as previously stated, COVID certainly brought indoor air quality to the forefront. I think in general, everybody agrees they want a healthy environment for students. They want a healthy environment for staff. I think one of the main challenges is just a lack of technical expertise in schools, right? We typically don't have industrial hygienists on staff. There's a lot of information out there. There could be challenges related to the age of your units. You talked about having older units, and then there's a lot of information on what you should do, and can you even do that with your old units? You could have a plan for replacement, the length of time that it takes to even do a project like that. Funding is a challenge. There's grants out there. Those take time. Now we've got, at least in California, the big thing is wildfire smoke. And so everyone is just more, I think, just aware of indoor quality in general. And then, when you talk about in the past, I think mostly what we heard was HEPA, right? We knew like 0.3 microns. That was something that everyone talked about. And then with COVID, now we all know, much smaller particles. When you talk about viruses and other things that could be in the air. So there's so much conflicting information. And because schools technically don't usually have that expertise on staff, you're kind of at the mercy of the vendor that you're using. And so I think that's part of it. And then just the perception, because you can go on, and search things online, and then everybody's concerns. And so it's a huge component of what needs to happen at a school. It's critical to your to the whole process and to the environment. And yet we don't have typically you don't have the expertise on staff to actually address it.
Yep. So it really boils down to the resources, leaning on expertise, industry expertise wherever you can. And obviously there's funding challenges, I think we'll discuss and certainly get questions about, but leaning on that expertise within this industry to make those correct decisions based on the challenges that you are facing today.
Well, and also you said maybe 20 kids in a classroom. I'm a high school district. We have 36 kids in a classroom. So wow. Depending on the age of your units, maybe they were initially designed for 28. We've got 36 plus maybe, help in the classroom. So all of that are challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you for that. I think we'll dive into that a little bit further as well. But question 4 is jumping back to Zach here. We just alluded to it. Pete also mentioned it earlier that better indoor air quality has health and well-being benefits, obviously far beyond COVID-19 or other airborne illnesses or even surface, as we just discussed. Can you elaborate a little bit further on these benefits for both students and staff?
Yeah, sure. And this is, even before I was in the Well Living Lab, I spent quite a bit of time looking at this exact question. I think really when we start thinking about indoor air quality, we do know from the literature, from the research that we have and are starting to conduct even in the Well Living Lab, that indoor air quality, when you improve it, it's going to improve certain metrics. So cognitive function being one of them, and literature notes that when you improve indoor air quality within the classroom, you do see improvements in students' test scores and even improvements in staff productivity. And there's many reasons for that. If you're more properly ventilating a school, you have less CO2 and other harmful particles, which we can definitely talk about here in a few minutes, that are floating around that might actually influence cognitive function. And there's actually a study within the public schools in Michigan that found that schools located in areas of the highest outdoor air pollution actually had the lowest attendance rates and the highest proportion of students that were failing to meet your standardized tests. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what does that have to do with what we're talking about here, which is really indoor air quality? And actually it has to do a lot with this discussion. I saw in the Q&A actually that there's some questions about what about older schools. Perfect question. And that's exactly the kind of question that we invite. When we start thinking about outdoor air pollution, at those older buildings, they're going to be more what you might call leaky. So they're going to have more drafting and just really areas where little particles from outside, air pollutants, can get inside. And that obviously isn't good. And ultimately, when you start thinking about the age of those buildings, you have another effect of that older infrastructure, which is that those HVAC systems, they're older. They can't often handle the more advanced air purification solutions that are needed ultimately to better ventilate and recirculate clean air back into the room. And so when you start thinking about what we're talking about here, portable air purification is incredibly important, because even in those older schools, that older infrastructure, you're able to clean and recirculate filtered air back into the room. When we start thinking about students' physical health, that's obviously important too. And we do know that, students, when they're in classrooms with better indoor air quality, that actually lowers absenteeism. And that's due to many different reasons. We talked about disease spread, and that's, of course, part of this equation. But it's also more acute exacerbations of pre-existing conditions. Those would be things like, most commonly, asthma. It's a definite problem. And so improving the indoor air quality in that regard is very important for those acute exacerbations. And then finally, and I believe Peter actually alluded to this, there has been some suggestion that improved indoor air quality improves not only sleep quality, but also has a downstream impact, of course, on cognitive function. I think we all know here, when you sleep better, you feel like you're just on top of things. And that's the same, of course, for students. The literature is very nascent, and there's definitely an opportunity to do more research. But when you really boil this down, as I believe it was, again, Peter that alluded to this, students are spending nearly all of their day at school. And so looking at things like the connection between improved indoor air quality in schools and sleep quality, and how those ultimately have an impact on cognition and therefore test scores and whatnot, is critically important and definitely an avenue of research that deserves further investigation.
Amazing answer. Wonderful answer. I think there's more work obviously being performed and more journal articles being published. But as you said, certainly a lot more research required and work required in that regard. That's a great answer. Pete, I'm gonna turn back to you here quickly. I think that this builds a little bit on the challenges that Judy was acknowledging that schools are facing. In your experience, how can schools ensure that they're implementing the solutions that they need to, regardless of geography, budget, or infrastructure, how can they ensure that they're accessing clean air, accessing the equipment, the resources to achieve a healthier environment?
Well, great, thanks. Glad you brought that up, Isaac. First, here's some facts, right? So let's consider that over 40% of school districts right now need to update or replace their HVAC systems in at least half of their schools. All right, that comes out to about 36,000 public schools nationwide, right there. Okay, teachers are expressing their concerns across the country. 95%, one survey noted, 95% of educators in the U.S. supported improved ventilation efforts in schools. Okay, so how do we do it, right? There's budgets to consider. There's configurations to consider. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There are advantages to the portable solution because, that tends to be much less onerous as it relates to configurations. I mean, you bring them in, you mount them on the wall, or you leave them freestanding, you plug them in. Huge advantage with that flexibility. But each school has its own unique needs based on geography, infrastructure, occupancy, and other factors. There are essentially two paths that schools can take. One, obviously, the upgrading of HVAC systems. Okay, HVAC systems they're in the ceiling, they're part of the structure of the building. And an upgrade to the HVAC system, it's got advantages. It also comes with typically higher costs than moving into the portable route, but its own advantages as well. And then secondly, of course, as we discussed, is the portable air filtration units, which have been incredibly effective and proven to be effective because they're located closer to where children and people are convening. If you think about the portable units and in particular the ones that Delos is advocating for and providing as solutions into the marketplace, you get a premium filtration efficiency. Okay, it removes more than 99.97% of particles at the, Judy noted this, the 0.3 microns in size level, which is more efficient than the HEPA standard for filter efficiency set by the regulators. Okay, in addition, on these portable units, there's flexible coverage options. You can place them where you need to, where folks are congregating the most. They're easy to install. You don't have to bring in specialized labor and bear the costs of, big renovation that typically would shut periods or sections of a real estate building or facility off for a period of time. So it's quite accessible from a cost perspective and super, super effective from a scientific perspective. On the HVAC, there are solutions out there that actually can address everything on the docket here, including energy usage. I mean, typically when you're going to increase the size of a filter or the effectiveness of a filter in an HVAC, it's going to use more energy. That does not always have to be the case, depending on the solution. We've identified a solution that actually reduces energy consumption and takes your MERV equivalent rating. Okay, MERV is a terminology. It's terminology used in the industry, and the higher the MERV rating, the more effective the filter is. But we have found a solution that can reduce energy consumption and therefore save money and save carbon footprint by about 40%, over 40%, and still satisfying a MERV 13 rating, which is excellent, right? So what happens is mechanically in the filter, again, is the more filtration you want, the thicker the filter medium needs to be, and that requires more energy to push the air through it. Okay, it's a industry topic called pressure drop, and we're not going to get too technical here, but there are mechanisms of action that do not have to increase the thickness of the filter medium. In fact, can be much thinner than your typical MERV filter, and that is great for energy consumption and savings in energy and lowering the carbon footprint. So it's all about making the right choices. Obviously, it's not one size fits all, as we've said, but there's pros and there's cons. Thankfully, there's ways to get this done. And then if you think about the costs, there's a lot of federal funding. We'll get into this in a minute. There's a lot of federal funding out there that's allocated to this. And, 3/4 of that funding has yet to be spent. The money's been deployed. It's accessible. It's available. There's an expiration date on it. So it's got to be spent. It's for that purpose of improving air quality, among other things. And schools, both public and private, can tap into those funds to address this, the costs. So, a whole rainbow of options here. We've spent a lot of time on this. As I said, almost a decade worth of research behind this. So happy to help in that regard. But I think the fact that federal funds are available, may be available, and in most cases they are, to help subsidize these costs is a big deal, and something the industry just really needs to take advantage of.
Yeah, it's a good point, Pete. I think there's an important component here where it's about timing as well. The portable solution is immediate. The renovations for an in-duct solution, that takes time. That's a process with budgets as well. That takes resources for installation. But what you're alluding to here is that there's a course of action that you can build upon with these products, or a timing, a cadence that can be deploying these units to create a healthier environment. So I think it's wonderful points that you're making. And obviously, as you said, the funding is available to do so. Judy, I'm curious to hear a little bit more on your perspective regarding the challenges facing your district specifically. How did you navigate and communicate to all of your stakeholders, students, faculty, families, and beyond, to promote that culture of safety for your schools, to really get people back into those environments and comfortable?
Well, I've been with the district for 15 years, so we've been cultivating that for the last 15 years. So I think if you're starting from scratch, it just takes time, right? But we've had a really good process whenever there's an issue or concern reported by whether it's a teacher, a parent, a student, regarding indoor air quality. So we had a process of inspection, there's site level inspection, a district level inspection, and I would get involved in bringing in industrial hygienists. If we found something that was always transparent, we would either address it. If we would post the lab results on, we would post that in the classroom and in the office. Parents could see it, along with a report that would translate that, right? So we've always been open about that. We know it's an issue. Typically, in the past, it's always been more of a CO2 issue, not necessarily the M word, mold, that no one wants to talk about. When it came to COVID, in California, our schools were closed for over 18 months. And so we had a kind of a big time gap to start working on this solution. And to keep the board updated, we have a weekly board report that we were kind of reporting on the process as we were going along. And then when teachers and everyone started coming back, by then we had determined the solution was going to be those portable units because of the time frame, because of the load in the classroom. And even when you talk about units, even when they're replaced, whatever the technology you're using on the units, is only effective when they're running. And so if you're not calling for heat, you're not calling for cool, those units aren't even on. So I like the solution of the portable units. We were able to implement them right away. I think your Delos team even helped put together. We laminated a 2-sided 1-page flyer, if you will. It talked about the technology, it talked a little bit about the district's process, how to operate them. Those are attached to every unit. We included that information to parents. And so we didn't have any concerns when kids started coming back, because we'd addressed that piece, at least initially. You know, there's ongoing efforts, but we continue to use the portable unit. So in fact, I haven't had any indoor air quality reports or issues since we came back. So I think that's helped in general. It's helped in general, just everyone understanding that we have something in place. It also helped, I think, the condition of the rooms, or the air in the classrooms. Yeah,
that's great. Obviously, as you're noting, education is so important, and communication is so important to your district. And obviously, as Zach and Pete have mentioned, we can get very technical in these discussions, but making it easy to consume for the public is obviously critical. Thank you, Judy. Zach, we're currently in the midst of a scary word that we see on the news these days, a triple-demic of COVID, flu, and RSV. In addition to the typical cold season, which many districts have been dealing with, Judy can certainly attest to this, with higher instances of absenteeism. When thinking about air quality remediation in classrooms, Pete just discussed the two different kinds of solutions that school districts can implement: induct infrastructure upgrades and portable air purification units placed within the classroom. Zach, can you share some details on the benefits for each as it relates to preventing pathogen transmission for students and faculty?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this one is personal too. I mean, I've seen nieces and nephews, especially with RSV right now, really be hit hard this year in particular. And so it's definitely something that's top of mind for me, just given the research that we do. And I would actually say, before getting into each, your induct units or what's going to be within that HVAC system and the portable air purification units, there's other things that need to be kept in mind here as well. Anytime you are looking to implement any type of solution to improve indoor air quality, definitely ensuring that the data are there that back that it is in fact effective at filtering and really recirculating that clean air back into whatever space you're looking to use it. That is the most critical thing that really you need to look for. And there's technical, to get back to what you were talking about, Isaac, there are technical terms to look for, but ultimately you want to ensure that, it's delivering clean air back into the space, because not all solutions that you'll find on the market are created equal. I think the next consideration has to be more in line with what you were talking about, Judy. It's really the current condition of the infrastructure within the given school that you're looking at, or the school district as a whole, and ultimately the resources to support that. Some schools, they have infrastructure, they have the resources necessary to do that full upgrade, the dream upgrade, if you will, to that induct infrastructure. So really improving that HVAC system to really be better able to filter and recirculate clean air back into the space, or even bring in clean air outdoors into the space. Either way, you're going to end up with improved indoor air quality. But yet you also have the other side of the coin, where you may have schools that are really too old to support those type of upgrades, or you just may not have enough resources across the district to actually be able to do that. And that's where, again, the portable air purification units are really crucial as it pertains to something that's both scalable and cost effective, while also providing localized indoor air quality improvements, because you can move them around wherever you need to and have an impact really on whatever space you're looking at. In this case, of course, a classroom. And when you start mapping that onto what Judy was talking about with classes that are, quite frankly, for the room size, overcrowded with 36 students, for instance, that becomes that much more important. What I will say as a final statement is that even in the schools that are able to, for instance, afford those upgrades to the induct systems, really improve their HVAC system, essentially, I would still advocate for the use of portable air purification units as well, for the simple reason that it's an extra added layer of protection, and it's, again, mobile. So it can be localized to where the greatest number of individuals are convening within a room. And it really gets back to, what has been called, especially over the pandemic, the Swiss cheese model of protection. So if you have improved stuff coming in from the HVAC system, so improved air or better air, if you will, coming in from the HVAC system, and you're recirculating clean air with portable air purification units also back into the room, that's a lot of protection. And it goes a long way to not only reducing illness spread, but also, as we've talked about here, improving multiple parameters of physical and cognitive health.
That's a great answer. Obviously, again, just points to you pointed to it, the multi-layers that we can approach or utilize as an approach to address these concerns. Thank you, Zach. Judy, this is a question for you, and it builds a little bit on the discussion we were talking about from an industry expertise perspective, as well as the resources that schools have available to them. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we watch this as a health and wellness company. Many companies have released new solutions, all sorts of solutions to the market, especially focused on improving indoor air quality or making those claims. Could you share a little bit more about your selection process and why you chose to work with Delos?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Initially, everybody's being bombarded, and I know indoor air quality was certainly at the forefront. So myself and the director of maintenance, we kind of worked together and said, okay, we need to start looking. And for all the reasons I previously said, older units, just the length of time it takes to do any kind of retrofitting, really people didn't know exactly what we're dealing with. We talked about the size of particulates, the size of filtration, all that stuff everybody's reading, and you're getting called daily by vendors, how they had the solution. Interestingly enough, the very first unit we looked at was the unit we ended up getting through Delos. It happened to be demoed to us by a local vendor. The problem was I had lots of questions. So I have a master's in occupational safety, so I know enough to know what kind of questions to ask, but I also know I don't know everything, right? So I had lots of questions. They couldn't answer any of them. They didn't even get back to me with any of the answers. It was more like they were just kind of reading off the bullet points. And so then we continued the search, looked at several other units. Again, it was the same type of thing. And I would ask questions that they couldn't answer. And at some point, just because of networking, right? I think this is what schools do really well. There was a friend in Northern California who had been on a webinar with Delos, and I had already talked about these units. I said I liked them, but I can't get enough information. So he's the one who sent me an email saying, I think these are the units you talked about, and here's some resources. So I actually contacted Delos and said, hey, I've looked at these, but I need some help. And so that's why I bought them through Delos, just because they had the team, they had all the data, they could answer all my questions and then some. And so we ended up with their system. And in this process, we're also getting like union representatives would say, what about this unit? Because, somebody contacted somebody in the union. And so I would do some research, and sometimes I didn't have time. I would just send it to Delos and say, help me out with this. And they would actually help me out with that research so I could compare. Once we made the decision, again, we had, the board updates. We had several virtual safety committee meetings where we were explaining what we were doing and why we were choosing this product to the teachers and all staff. And as questions would come up, either I could address them because I knew enough about it, or if I didn't, now I felt like I had a team behind me. And so that was really what attracted me to Delos in general, because they had the well lab. I'm not be saying that correctly, but I knew they had all this data, and they had been doing this. They didn't just jump into the market. A lot of companies jumped into the market due to COVID. They had a history and a track record of being in this market and being in this space several years before COVID hit. So I had a lot of confidence in the information that I was providing. Yep.
Thank you for that answer, Judy. And obviously we, as an organization, pride ourselves on being a resource to any client that we're working with. Pete, is there anything that you want to address in that regard? I mean, creation of the well building standard, the scientific evidence that we really focus on to support clients. We're not a manufacturer. Just want to give you a chance to also address what Judy had just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Judy, thanks for the acknowledgement and the confidence that you've expressed in Delos. So we're obviously here to help educate, inform, and then help solution. Isaac, the point you make is a good one, referencing one of the points that Judy made, that we didn't just pop up overnight on COVID and try to get into the marketplace. We've been at this for a decade. Principally, back in 2014, we launched the Well Building Standard. That's the world's largest certification platform for healthy buildings. We've been focusing on the convergence of the health sciences and the building sciences for a decade. COVID had brought the importance of work like that to light, for sure. But this is something that's in our bones as an organization, and it's part of our mission, really to use real estate assets as a vehicle for improved health and well-being, as opposed to something that disrupts that and causes a lot of harm. So thank you for that, both guys.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Pete, we'll stick with you on this final question. We've eased it a little bit related to federal funding. We've mentioned it multiple times. Following the pandemic, funds were obviously, or during the pandemic, funds were made available to districts and schools of all sizes. Can you share a bit more about how this funding can help schools improve their air quality?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Pandemic, shining a big light on the need for significant upgrades in technology and infrastructure of our schools, primarily related to air quality, but it does go on and on. In March 2021, if we draw a timeline, the DOE introduced the American Rescue Plan, ARP. Okay, that was allocating $122 billion of funding to provide emergency relief grants for K through 12 schools. Then you have ESER, right? Elementary and secondary school emergency relief, which was funding that can be used to cover a wide range of expenses to help improve indoor air quality, specifically in schools. The ESER funds, can be used for portable air filtration units, as well as bigger infrastructural HVAC upgrades, right? So covered in that regard. And we continue to stress the need for school systems to take advantage of that because it's applicable and it will help create much better environments. So when you sum it up, and you look at public school districts in K through 12, this isn't just a public school district phenomenon or access to it. Funding is available for non-public schools. They're eligible to use their funding from the Emergency Assistance EANS program. That's emergency assistance to non-public schools. All right, so there's pockets of money all over the place for this, and it's extraordinarily effective. Now that these things have been approved, now that they have been delivered, and the clock is ticking on timeline to actually execute and spend the money, we think the next 12 months are going to be extraordinarily active, as the rest of that 80+% that still hasn't yet been deployed, finds its way into specific action items and solutions. We have helped numerous districts navigate their ESER funds to make the most out of the opportunities open to them. Our air experts are available to help navigate the various funding options, to answer any questions you may have as well. But this is something that we stress. It's something you're supposed to jump on, obviously take advantage of, and there is plenty of capital out there, billions and billions of dollars, ready to be deployed, and entirely applicable to the solutions we discussed today. But we're here for questions because we think that this is going to be a very active year in that regard.
Excellent. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Zach, Judy, and Pete, for the answers here of the discussion we just had. We do have a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump into those. Actually received some prior to the start of the webinar. So, Pete, I'm going to stick with you again here. I think this is a very relevant question from a research perspective, and a lot of the work that we have done over the years in this case. The question is, which is better to use, hydroxyl generators, and I think I'd throw in ionization devices in here as well, or air purifiers? And then in addition to that, what level of air filters are recommended now for HVAC systems? So which is better to use, hydroxyl generators and ionizers or air purifiers? And then, of course, what really MERV rating is suggested at this point?
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the advantages of sitting at the center of this sort of well-building ecosystem is that we have seen just about everything, every approach, every mechanism of action. We've listened to every argument. We've done a lot of testing ourselves. Look, quite simply, we strongly advocate for the use of mechanical filtration systems. Okay, they draw air through a filter media, pull particles out of the air so that we don't breathe them in. All right, so the actual physical removal of particles is what's important here. Hydroxyl radical devices, ionization devices, they're primarily used for a pathogen kill, and they're effective on a pathogen kill, right? However, we've had challenges with the real-world application and efficacy of those devices, which disseminate charged particles, deliberately throwing charged particles into the air. And for that reason, we also have safety concerns based on the byproduct reactions which may come out of a process like that. Throwing charged particles into the air next to a window with sunlight coming in, I mean, you're talking about a situation that's very ripe for the generation of ozone. You don't want to, and ozone is not a good thing. That's a harmful thing to be putting into the air. So you don't want to try to solve one problem and create others. We think the mechanical filters that actually trap and remove particles from the air is clearly the best approach. We have our concerns about other mechanisms of action, particularly in the ionization and the charged particle space, because of what I just described as one potential harmful byproduct. And it's critical to rely on science and facts and put the burden on manufacturers to prove their claims, especially post-COVID, with everybody under the sun seeming to have a claim to be made and a new product introduced. As far as the ratings, the higher the MERV rating, the better. Okay. Obviously, as we mentioned before, that often comes at a sustainability cost. It may use more energy, it may cost more money as a result in kilowatt per hour usage throughout the course of a year. So we think it's important that, we either find the balance between MERV rating, and of course, cost and benefit analysis and energy consumption, or find solutions where you get the best of both. I highlighted in a specific inline solution that we're utilizing in the market, which has got the same technology and the same mechanism of action as the portable units that we endorse. But we've highlighted an inline solution that actually can reduce energy costs, and it comes with a MERV 16 output. I mean, that's wonderful. 16 is phenomenal. If you can do that and use lower energy, then you're doing a very, very good job. So they do exist out there. Even the inline solution I described that can get you a MERV 16 rating, if you will, right, with air quality filtration, but not causing a pressure drop that we described before from a real thick filter, clogging up the air, requiring more energy to drive it through the HVAC system. This MERV 16 outcome in particular comes with a pressure drop equivalent to if you were using a MERV 8 in the HVAC. So just a home run outcome. They're there. And we've got to find the right information to make sure that the capital is being to the right situation.
Thank you, Pete. That's great information. Obviously, it alludes to some of the conversations we're having with Judy about reliance on industry expertise and vetting resources that we can certainly provide. So, thank you for that, Judy and Zach. What kind of? I'll go to Judy first here. What kinds of changes in new schools are needed for a healthier environment?
Well, new schools, I have a great opportunity, right? Because everything's new. In fact, we just opened a new high school, and it's just the quality or the capability of the units themselves. I like to see more monitoring included, so then you can be more proactive with an energy management system that has a dashboard. You can track all your units. At the schools where we have that, it's definitely where they can. What I like to see is not just the temperature and humidity, but also the CO2 and the particulates, that type of thing. So then you have your HVAC tech and check that every morning, and then they kind of know where they're headed, right? Because there's an issue, so you can be much more proactive.
Yeah, that makes sense. Zach, what kinds of changes in new schools are needed for a healthier environment?
Yeah, I think the ultimate air quality concerns that really come to mind in newer builds that exist outside of course, pathogen transmission. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Sorry about that. In any case, the air quality concerns outside of pathogen transmission in new builds really comes down to a few different airborne constituents, but the biggest one of concern for us is actually volatile organic compounds, so VOCs. That doesn't have to mean too much to anybody on this call, because again, it's one of those more technical terms, but some VOCs, as they're called, can be particularly harmful to health. It's definitely dependent on which ones you're talking about. But the reason that that's relevant in a new build is oftentimes, for instance, the epoxies that are used, for instance, in flooring, or even the paints that they use in the new builds of these schools can really off-gas, those constituents. And so when we start mapping that onto this discussion, even though those newer schools may have the improved HVAC systems, it really is important to think about supplementing that with a portable solution as well. And so that's where the whole concept of portable air purification still comes into play.
Good points. You alluded to something interesting, Zach, that I'm gonna jump over here to Judy with this question. And you talked a little bit about VOCs, and obviously VOCs are important from an air quality perspective. Particulate matter is very important, aerosolized particles, all these factors. There's obviously, Judy, there's a focus around improvement of ventilation and filtration, incredibly important to IAQ. In conjunction with filtration and ventilation improvements, are schools assessing other materials and furnishings, as Zach was just alluding to understand their off-gassing, to understand the particulate that they may create in those environments, ultimately, to create a healthier space, to create a healthier environment? Are you really looking at those furnishings, those materials utilized within the classroom?
I think, now I'm not on the facility side, so my guess would be probably no in general, other than to say they're whatever they are. When they're purchasing new furniture, they're always going by accredited and what's approved by different standards. I'm fully aware of VOCs, and they do know that there can be off-gassing. There can be off-gassing. My husband is there can be off-gassing with carpet and furniture. I know. It's like, hello. We love the virtual world, don't we? But it's important to know that I'm aware of that. And then I know that when we have new units, they run them for a week, that kind of thing. So they're trying to address that, the off-gassing to begin with. We haven't had, we also have had to have some testing done when we've had issues, and we will include those types of tests. But in general, I don't think schools are paying that much. In my experience, right? Because they're just going by the standards. And but I'm certainly aware of that. Yep,
makes sense.
So really when it comes up, we'll address it. But they know about carpeting, and we'll tell people when we paint something, we're giving information out that there's going to be some off-gassing, and so they try to run the units, over the weekend or for the week or whenever before they occupy those areas.
Yep, that makes sense. This last one is a couple questions came in about this, and it's really for Pete and Judy again here. And it jumps back into federal funding, and it's a question of how we can successfully advocate for school boards and district level personnel to improve or stand behind funding to improve the air quality for students and staff. And part of one of the questions really acknowledged that there's no incentives or mandates in particular for schools to make these improvements. Pete, I'd love to get a little bit of your perspective here on how we can successfully advocate these school boards and incentivize these schools to make upgrades to improve air quality, improve the environment of the school. Pete, you may be on, I apologize, you may be on mute if I...
On mute, I apologize. Sorry about that. Yeah, good. So yeah, it starts with education, right? It starts with making sure that we can inform people of, the problems that need to be solved and ways to do that. Separate the fact from fiction, stay grounded in scientific evidence, really give a lot of horsepower to anybody that's in a position to make a decision as to why they're making that decision and what are the choices available to them. You know, there have to be alternatives to HVAC renovation. That's a big budget item. That's a school, you know, in some cases it's a shutdown of certain wings. I mean, there's just a lot of things that are disruptive with that process. Thankfully, the portable air filtration units, as you said, Isaac, it's a solution now. As you said, Zach, it's a very effective scientific solution because of the localized filtration. I mean, when air travels 18 feet across the room to get into a vent, and then it's filtered and then recirculated, you're talking about a lot of contamination that can happen on the way there. When you're putting localized portable filters, you know, it's logical to agree with the science that, of course, that would be very effective. But, you know, as far as incentivizing, I'd make a point. $122 billion of funding available for things like this. Like, there's an incentive right there. You know, it's free money. Let's do the right thing with that money. I don't know what could incentivize folks more than funds being available to pay for it. That I believe it should be the key driver, and where we're spending a lot of time educating people that, you know, they've got access to this and we can help navigate through that process. But I think that's probably one of the best things we can do is make sure that the awareness is there, make sure that the variety of solutions are there, make sure that those solutions have been battle tested and checked and validated with science as a backbone, and then of course, you know, in deploying it, get into the to the mode of helping people uncover and tap into the funds that have been made available for this purpose.
That's a great answer. Judy, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well, with certainly a lot of experience in this realm.
Well, we've had a lot of input, right, from our teachers, our bargaining units, the certificated and classified side. So we get a lot of input. The board's certainly interested in that. And so I think because we were able to deploy those portable units right away, that addressed a lot of the concerns. Now, we have been working, there's also some local legislation in our state. And so we've been working and we've addressed, we're getting ready to replace 189 units. We're putting in some emergency or energy management systems. So we've been able to do that by first kind of bridging the gap with those portable air purifiers. And so I think that it helped everybody. I feel better, understand that we were doing something, and then we are in the process of doing more. But again, part of the problem is that that process takes time. There are funds out there, and then you have to prioritize.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you for that answer, Judy. Zach, I have a quick one for you, which I think is very relevant. Where is the best placement of an air filtration device to prevent stale and dead air? You talked about hotspots earlier. And also, how does a floor unit ensure that all the air is being pulled through it to get proper filtration? So placement and a reference to a unit sitting on the floor as well.
Yeah, so, you know, there's continual research ongoing for this exact thing. What I will say is, in our research, we looked at, and I didn't mention this, but we looked at how the return ducts that suck air into the ventilation system, as well as the diffusers that throw air from the ventilation system back into the room, how particles were flowing through them during the operation of those portable air purification units versus, of course, the non-operation of those units. How we ultimately decided upon where to place them, and what I typically say to the question you're asking is, try to get them as close to where people are convening without interrupting the overall purpose of the room. So in a classroom, it's of course an educational environment. You need to be able to talk. Secondarily to that, what I would advise is looking for areas where there is perhaps not those, you know, outlets, if you will, on the ceiling that are throwing air back into the room. And it's really easy to really get on a chair, preferably not a swivel chair, or a ladder, and detect whether or not that is in fact sucking air back into the ventilation system, or, as you'll feel, pushing air back onto, for instance, the back of your hand. Putting it in areas where those are not present is a secondary concern. So if you can do both of those things, that usually gives you the best coverage. But it's not an exact science, but I think we're getting closer.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. We are up on time. We're all very busy, so I would just like to take a moment to thank all of you, all of our panelists, for joining today. Wonderful insights, wonderful questions asked. Judy, Zach, Pete, thank you so much. Everybody who attended, if you would like to watch today's presentation again, an on-demand archive will be made available through edweek.org or using today's link within the next 24 hours. All webinar attendees will receive an email with some additional information. If you have any other questions that were not answered in today's session or would like to learn more, please visit delos.com. That's DELOS.com. We would love to answer any questions. We would love to work together. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to everybody who was able to join today. We very much appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to working together soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Judy. All right, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.